Excellent. Okay. Very good information. Okay. So now the next subject on the list, where do you want to go from here?
The observatory, of course.
All right. Very good.
Okay. I love it because it's in New Mexico, isn't it? I mean, it's just wonderful. And interestingly enough, the first building was just done in 1947. Obviously, it's a much more up-to-date building and it's got all the latest technology, but it was originally put up just after, I believe, just after the Roswell incident. So it does date to 1947, which is fantastic. It's the finest. It contains both optical and digital sensing equipment, and it's the finest device for capturing pictures of the sun that there is on the planet. That's a key point to bear in mind. Now, what I think has made me smile was that the officials have released a couple of days ago, I think it was, a blanket statement saying, look, there was a criminal activity taking place in the, it's called the Sunspot Observatory, I believe, but there was criminal activity taking place and therefore it was closed down. And for the safety of the employees working there, they were evacuated. That's the official line that's placed out.
Yes.
And what amuses me, and it only amuses me, it doesn't aggravate me or anger me, it just amuses me, is the number of people who are posting saying, oh, well, that's all right then. You see, there wasn't anything going on. There you go. You conspiracy theories, this is all it was. And they accept that. And that's really sad for the planet if there are people who would do that, because if you were to understand, then the similar, it's not as powerful, but a similar observatory in Australia was closed down. A similar one in Pennsylvania was closed down. A similar one in Chile was closed down. A similar one in Spain was closed down. And in Hawaii, 2 were closed down. So all these were devices to monitor the sun. So not only was the local old post office closed down next to the Sunspot Observatory, but it and all the others. So in other words, the civilian sector had no eyes on the sun over that crucial period, because all of these satellites, beg your pardon, all of these observatories were largely or partly funded by the US, but they were operating under a non-military regime. So there weren't military personnel staffing them, they were civilian personnel. Now, what I do know is that that in some of these places, and the one in New Mexico, there was a very interesting connection between the employees of the Sunspot Observatory and some of the employees at the local post office. And information was being passed, and that's the reason that the post office was closed down, because they didn't want information being passed out. So it's got nothing to do with criminal activity. We know, I didn't know it was the FBI. I assumed it was SEALs or Delta Force, but I later was told that it was the FBI who landed in Black Hawk helicopters to take control of this facility. And that you just don't do that. And the reason I guess it was FBI was that you can run with a cover story that it was a criminal matter. If you started doing it with CIA or the heavy military, then you really do lead even the most asleep newspapers or newspaper reporters to actually begin to ask questions. So if it's the FBI, it's all okay, it's all fine, nothing to worry about. So we know that a number of observatories were all closed down at exactly the same time. We know the post office was closed down. We know that all the staff were taken away separately into different rooms. Some were taken away out of the premises, some were meant on the premises. We know that the computer files were logged and blanked and removed. And we know that objects surrounding the sun were identified. And the whole purpose of this was that the good guys had been tipped off that an operation, a experiment was to be taking place around our sun, and they were given warning of it. The problem was that nobody realized actually just how powerful these observatories were and how crystal clear the pictures or the information coming back was. So when they closed them down, they didn't do it early enough. They didn't sort of say, well, it's all going to happen on Tuesday, therefore we'll close it down on Monday. When it happened, either their amount of time they had was very short, or they assumed that this machinery on Earth couldn't pick it up. And when they realized it was picking it up because they were monitoring all the crazy chatter coming on, they went in very quickly and had a look at it. So it was because of the fleet of spacecraft around the sun. That's what that was all about.
Okay. This is, I had to run and get my other computer because this is really fascinating, because I have another side of that story. But I have to say that I have to say, I guess, thank you. This is a very weird thing to probably do when you're a broadcaster, but nonetheless, I have to say, I was actually given this information last night in my, I don't know what to call it. Some kind of download, really, I guess, is the best, simplest way to say. So I was given that information last night that you're giving me here. And giving all of us. And on top of it, I've done a lot of investigation around this, and I sent some of that to you. And it does seem that, I have a back channel source who has, now what can I say about this? I have to be really careful, who has had access to some data. I guess I'll just say that, generally speaking. I better not say who they are or who they've tapped into, because obviously it's not like they're not going to be already knowing who my source is and all this kind of thing, because that source is heavily watched. But, there's no reason encouraging other governments, etc. And I don't want to get anyone in trouble here. But I do have, and I can put on the screen some information, and I did send you a bit of it. I am being very careful about it because there may be indicators on some of this information that might reveal where I got it, so to speak. But sure. I'm going to throw some of these pictures up here and basically say that, I have tweeted this out, and I put it out on Facebook as well as on Twitter and on my Hootsuite of social media, and some of it. And I've also got pictures of the sun that were taken by this person that somehow were captured around the exact same time and do show some craft. I'm not sure, it's hard when you don't know what you're looking at, so to speak, right? So it's hard to say exactly what they got. But they have definitely tapped into also chatter, back channel chatter. And the information is that this does relate to now I'm not saying it's Eamon Ansbro's technology, and he's an astronomer, an Irish astronomer who I've interviewed now twice. He has a grand experiment that he's trying to reach ET by superluminal travel. Actually, no, that's kind of a joke of mine, but he's actually using a quantum mechanical device that they sort of invented.
Actually met him. I've met him.
Yes, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. So, and you can watch my interviews with him, which really explain it totally, quite extensively. And there's a second interview, which is more up to date about how he was being obstructed, in fact, in his efforts. I don't know the status as of right now, but I can tell you that the indicators I got from my back channel source matched everything he had been telling me about his device. I have told him this. He has basically been non-committal, saying, well, that would be outside the sort of mission statement of a solar observatory, as far as he knew, to be what they're trying to do is go out simultaneously, send these signals out to all star systems, as far as, I don't know, you can think of many, many galaxies, not just one, not just our solar system, but to almost leapfrog over what one might say, the solar system that's under control of the secret space program, and contact ET from there. Now, there are indicators, very strong indicators, that the solar observatories were involved in an experiment that was very similar to Eamon Onsbrook's. I don't know if they piggybacked on his technology or whether they had devised their own, and that the Chinese were actually trying to hack into it and be party to this so-called experiment, and that they were getting replies. They were having sort of, you might say, even some kind of communication going on. This is my understanding based on putting these facts together that don't connect necessarily unless you have this back channel that I have. So that's what I've got. Now, it doesn't rule out this other thing, which I also had downloaded last night, which you're saying, which I think is very much part of the story. Obviously, we're not getting the whole story, but it is fascinating. And I will tell you that I have an agent, insider. You're always an agent. Once you're an agent, always an agent. So I have an agent insider who has told me that when I told him about my interviews with Eamon Onsbrook, told me unconditionally that, of course, they would never allow Eamon to be successful at his efforts and that they would shut it down. So then you get the solar observatories making these efforts, finding, I think, going outside what was their, what they were told, their mission statement, whatever you want to call it. And of course, if you contact ET, it's quite possible you want to tell some friends, which is where the post office might have gotten involved. I don't know. Just my guess. So what do you want to do with all of that, Simon?
I want to agree with you 100%. Right. Before you came out and told me that, I did actually say to you that the satellite, I keep calling them satellites, so the base stations contained, they had optical, but I said they also had digital equipment. Uh-huh. And it was through the digital equipment that a communication can be run. And in fact, actually, it's not as difficult as you might imagine. It can be constructed quite simply. It's the frequency at which it has to bounce on the Earth. So it was used through the digital equipment, not the optical equipment. So these installations had this capability. The gentleman you referred to is highly regarded and holds a key post in an organization that is remarkably well known to most Americans and even some Europeans. And the difficulty is, of course, that it's funded by the US, which means that that's the paymaster. If you, as an individual or a group, were receiving downloads, as you do, Kerry, if you're receiving downloads, you could get information to construct things, or you could get information to give you an idea of what you should do. And the law of the multiverse within the good guys is that they can't just come charging in, they have to be asked for help. Now, if a whole host of bad guys are already dealing with certain governments and have an arrangement, like in the 1930s, the mob ruled certain streets, and you couldn't go into that street unless you were part of that mob. But if an individual or group of individuals could open a separate communication channel and ask for help, not asking on behalf of the government, but asking on behalf of the human race, then that is all that the other side needs as an invitation to come in. The fleet of craft, I just want to go a bit further with this, the fleet of craft were, the evolution on this planet is actually by and large directed by the sun. Global warming, as it's been sold to the public, is just a lie, total lie. There is a warming, but it's not through carbon emissions. You might get 1 centigrade, but it's not the big deal here. The big deal is that the environment is being affected by the particular frequency of light coming from the sun. Now, the human race is slightly delayed. We're behind schedule a little bit, partly because we're all a bit silly, and partly because the bad guys have had thousands of years at manipulating us, and as a result of it, they're really good at what they do. So one of the things you can do when certain things happen in the universe or the multiverse is you can alter the frequency of energy coming from the star. The sun, the main star, is responsible for the evolution of our solar system. It's not just going to be the Earth that's going to change. All the planets are moving and changing on an energy basis. And so this fleet of craft, I understand, were altering and changing the frequency to impact humans and the Earth in a slightly different way than it was originally intended. So the fleet of craft, I accept as a fleet of craft. I believe that they were there not using the sun as a portal to come in and out just for and that's the end of it. They were actually there to work with the energy of light coming from the sun, and it's the way that it affects humanity on the Earth. So yes, we are, you made a joke of it, but you're absolutely right that the finest, fastest communication is through the DNA. The next best is through light. So if we have a superluminal or a D-wave type system that can operate a communication system above the speed of light, that's what these guys were capable of doing with their machines on these observatories. Then you can reach objects much quicker than you would otherwise have done. And that's my understanding. Does any of that match with what you know, Kerry?
Absolutely. Yes. And wonderful kind of summation there. I'm going to try, I have put one message up there and I wanted to send it to you. So I'm going to try to drop that into your chat.
It'll be down on my box here somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you just, but we have to move on with the discussion while I get my technical thing together to do that. So
Sure.
So let's continue. And I think, you know, for people, this is very good information. And I now you didn't, the only question I have there is you didn't kind of clarify. You said they wanted to modify the, I don't know, the frequency or whatever it is of the light coming from the sun or something of that nature, if I understood you. But you didn't say whether in a positive way, are they dialing it up
positive.
or down?
It is totally positive.
Okay. All right. Very interesting.
Well, on the radio show that I did a little while ago, what I said is that I don't want our listeners, my listeners when I do my radio show and your listeners here on your show, to imagine that President Trump has authorized the FBI to put a stop to disclosure. My understanding is that this type of disclosure, I'm not defending it, I'm just telling you what I've been told, that this type of disclosure would be 0 to 60. The disclosure that the White House wants is a much more gradual, gentle disclosure, but it wants this alien disclosure as one of the last things to be disclosed. It would much rather things like 9/11 and the gold heist and things like that to be dealt with first. So it wasn't, my understanding is it wasn't because the good guys wanted to prevent disclosure in its true sense. They didn't want it now, and they wanted disclosure at their speed. Now, we could argue that we're ready for it, we want it all now, and I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying why those guys were sent in.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying they're dialing it down in a negative way, but they mean it in a positive way, or you're saying the cover up of dialing it up was done? I'm sorry.
Okay, I don't think I understand you, Kerry.
Okay, so you were saying Trump administration sent in. Are you saying they sent in?
They authorized it, yes.
A group of our space program. In other words, it's our guys that are up there at the sun.
No, Kerry. I mean the FBI.
Oh, okay. Sent in
the people who authorized the FBI to go in and close all those sites down.
That part. Okay.
From.
All right, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting.
Simply because they didn't want disclosure coming out because they're not ready for it.
Okay, yeah, that gets into a whole interesting discussion, but we won't go there at this exact moment. It's certainly worth talking about at some point. But all right, thank you. That's fascinating stuff. It is really interesting. This whole that gets into Eamon Unsbro's whole position, if you will, and the position like Project Camelot has, and certainly yourself and others. In other words, we are pushing the envelope ahead of the rest, and we are basically saying we can handle the truth. That's in essence what we're saying.
Absolutely.
And so we are not in full agreement on the timeline, if you want to call it that, but we are in agreement, at least with a certain portion of this ruling group that do agree that people do need to know eventually, and even on a certain I think there is an escalation even on the sort of side that sent in the FBI, so to speak, that they acknowledge that they are now under the gun to do a lot more faster than they previously wanted. Would you agree?
Yes, because what's happened, to my knowledge, at least 3 deadlines have gone and passed where certain positive forces have said to US administrations, you really do have to, explain humanity's position within the universe, within the multiverse. And each time the president has said yes, that he would, and then reneged on it and given the excuse that it wasn't ready, that they couldn't do this, they couldn't do that. And I reported I think 6 months ago, that a final ultimatum had been given, not to this president, but the final Obama, saying that if he didn't make a disclosure, then they were going to do it anyway. And the whole point about the US administration making the disclosure was that they then could manage the fallout. But if it was taken out of their control, they wouldn't be able to manage the fallout. Now, with the arrival of President Trump, that threat had been removed, but there was an understanding that it certainly would take place, if not in his first administration, but in a second administration.
And that dovetails with what Mark Richards has told me, that it actually, disclosure has been pushed along, if you want to call it that, and so there are various things happening, even in Syria, for example, to do with the reptilians who are pushing for it, believe it or not, and other races, and they of course have a rather nefarious reason for wanting disclosure, but nonetheless, that's a reality. So yeah, that totally dovetails with what I'm getting.
Good. Yeah. Good. One day we'll disagree.
Okay, we'll look forward to that one. And
I want to talk about QAnon, and I want to talk about Supreme Judge Kavanaugh.
Okay, go right ahead, and I'm going to give you some stuff. I think, let me see if, can you hold on 1 minute while I try to do this? Because if I could put this on, I think I will be fascinated to get your reaction. And this would be live because you've never seen this. I haven't sent it to you yet. This is going to actually be motion picture, believe it or not. And I hope there's no identifying marks on it, let me say, because I'm going to see if I can get this on the screen. So bear with me 1 second. And I've got it here. And then I'm going to actually play it for you. And first I'm going to play it for the audience. Okay. And
so
then
this is just audio, is it? Or
no, this is a video and it doesn't have any audio.
So how can I watch it?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to give it to you and then you'll have to open it on your own desktop. How's that?
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so stand by here. So I've got you on my other, so that you can see it at the same time everyone else gets to see it.
Okay.
More or less.
So are you, I don't understand, are you emailing it to me or what?
Oh, I'm going to drop it into your Skype.
Ah, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that should work. So stand by 1 second here. I'm doing it as we speak. It's not a big file, but it is a motion picture, so it should go quickly. And I'm going to take you off the screen and put this on. So stand by for this. This is footage of the sun that was taken just around this time of all of these events going on. So
it's arrived. So I'm going to play it now. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's being played on my screen here. So this is courtesy of a very talented individual, and it is a he. He is zooming in at this moment to show some things on the screen, and then that's it. It's very short. And then I have some other still shots for those. I'll play it one more time for the audience here so they can see it again. And are you able to watch it, Simon?
I've watched it, but I have to be honest and say I don't know what I'm looking at.
Well, it's very difficult. But we're looking at it's the way astronomers shoot the sun. They put this disc in the middle so that I guess the camera can handle the light. I don't really know. Okay. And what this person is trying to show us, if I understand it, and first of all, there is a black. You can kind of see a black dot next to the rim of this round circle.
Yeah. Okay.
That's on the sun. That would be a very large craft, from what I understand, that we could see, if I understand what I'm looking at. And then there is something here down in the lower area, which I don't understand it either, but could be a kind of a flash, an indicator that something is being triggered on the sun.
Right. Now that for me is much more interesting. I was initially looking for flying saucers, you see, and I was very disappointed when I didn't see any flying saucers. What I did see was this, as I'm looking at the picture in the southwest quarter, down at the bottom to the left, some very large flares showing intense energy light. And that actually would back up with what I'd been saying earlier, that the sun is producing some very useful frequency, which others can then tweak or change. So for me, the picture is not important for what it may or may not show from alien spacecraft, but for me, it's much more important because it could be showing some intense release of energy, which is why those craft were there.
Yes. Okay. Well, very good. So either way, I'm not an expert when I look at these pictures either. But I thought that they looked really fascinating. I think that energy indicates something going on there that looks really amazing. I think there are craft in the picture. I may not even understand which are craft and which are not, because I think these pictures that I look at of the sun are always very difficult to tell what you're looking at. So, but anyway, so we get that.
A brilliant picture, I must say.
Yeah, a very, very talented guy. So, all right. So now at this moment, let's move on to the next subject, and which is QAnon.